Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist worldwide.
I can tell you right off the bat that Rad Dog is going to end up on the show tonight. She's just been barking and jumping around and kind of wired. I don't know if it's because she's been cooped up all day and she's just looking at me. Like at any moment, she's just going to flip out and start barking. And, so it's going to happen in the next hour and a half. I just want to warn you. I think she's excited because Daddy was gone all weekend. I was off at the Florida Humanist Conference. It was a ball. The Florida Free Thought Conference was an amazing weekend in Orlando, and I had one of the honors of my life, the opportunity to shake hands with and get a photograph taken with James Randi, the amazing Randy. And it's an opportunity I wasn't sure I was going to get. It just seemed like I was never in a venue where he was speaking. I've never been to TAM. I didn't know that I would make it even next year. I knew he wasn't in the best of health. I just didn't think I would have the shot. And he was kind enough to do the radio show. I guess it's been a year and a half or so. We did a great podcast exposing the faith healers. And he was amazing. I mean, the guy did 30 minutes on the air with me, and he was just as sharp as he's ever been, And he owned it when he was on stage this weekend, watching him do his thing, work the crowd. He's obviously a half-century veteran of show business and one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. And so I walked up to him shamelessly in the lobby of the hotel. I'm like, Mr. Randy, I just want you to know how much you mean to me. I hear your work. And I try not to be that guy. I try to be cool about it, and then I meet these people who, he was the guy. He was the guy who did 22 shots on Johnny Carson's show and exposed Uri Geller and exposed Peter Popoff and has done an amazing amount of work with DJ Grothy and the folks over at JREF, exposing these charlatans, those people who are scamming all across the planet, filling their pockets by claiming to have powers that they, to date, cannot prove, right? The $1 million challenge. So it was awesome. Thank you to everybody for an amazing time. I guess next up on the calendar is going to be Skepticon. That's coming up the weekend of November the 15th, skepticon.org. If you want to find out more about the largest free thought conference in the world, I believe. Tonight's show starts with a dialogue, and the dialogue is between an upset parent and my special guest tonight. This is an excerpt from his book, and I'm sharing it with you with his permission. It goes something like this, and I'll just read it out loud. By the way, my special guest is Peter Boghossian. Peter's book says this: I never answer my office phone. The one time I did, I received a call from an upset parent. His son was enrolled in my class, and he was upset that I questioned students' faith. I told him to come in during office hours so we could talk about it. For better or worse, putting the onus of action on someone usually ends the discourse, as most people won't act beyond the initial contact. He was in my office within 30 minutes. The upset parent, who was in his mid-50s and rugged but with soft hands and dyed black hair, looked around suspiciously as he sat down. Frowning, he spoke with a sense of urgency. I told you on the phone you crossed the line by asking questions about my son's faith. Okay, wait, please. First, what class is your son taking? Critical thinking. Okay, thanks. And why do you think faith should be off the table? Because it's an abuse of your authority. You have no right to ask students They're young and they'll believe what you tell them. He went on for a few minutes, basically repeating himself. I listened. Okay, so what should I talk about in a critical thinking class? Anything except that. Algebra? That's ridiculous. You know yourself you shouldn't talk about algebra. True, but I'm trying to establish a baseline, things I should and shouldn't talk about, right? So I shouldn't talk about algebra, but what about other faiths? What about Islam? Should I talk about Islam? No. There may be Islamics in the class. No, definitely not. Should I talk about how people come to knowledge? Yes, as long as you don't talk about faith. So just to be clear, I should talk about how people come to knowledge as long as it doesn't relate to faith. Is that your view? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, that's correct. And what about Noah's Ark? Can I talk about that? What? What about it? Am I allowed to talk about how people know about the big boat and all of the species and such? No. What about the koala bear? What about the koala bear? Can I talk about how the koala bear went from the Ark to Australia? What are you talking about? What koala bear? You know, those cute little fuzzy bears, they're called koala bears. They live in Australia. Have you ever been to the zoo? I know what a koala bear is, but why are you talking about koala bears? Because I want to know how the koala bear got to Australia. And I want to know if you think I can talk about this. But what does the koala bear have to do with anything? Well, once the koala bear got off the Ark, how did it get to Australia? It migrated, you know? But it only eats eucalyptus leaves, and there's no eucalyptus trees where the Ark allegedly landed. So how did the koala bear get to Australia? It used to eat other things. So it evolved. There was a long pause. So should I or shouldn't I talk about the koala bear? You shouldn't talk about it because you're really talking about faith, and that's beyond your authority. Okay, so I'm trying to clarify this for myself. I feel like I don't get it, but I really do want to understand your position. The koala bear lives in Australia. Is that a question? No, I'm saying the koala bear lives in Australia. Okay. Long pause. So you're saying that the koala bear couldn't get to Australia without those leaves? No, I'm not saying anything. I'm merely asking, how did the koala bear get to Australia if there's no eucalyptus where the Ark crashed? The upset parent abruptly whips out his phone and he makes a call. I sit back patiently. There's no answer. He leaves a message for his religious leader and repeats the question, how did koala bears get to Australia after Noah's Ark landed? Okay, so when you don't know something, you called someone to ask them, right? Yeah. The upset parent then went into an unnecessary but confident explanation about the religious hierarchy of his church. I cut him off after 2 minutes. So maybe if these issues are raised in class, then your son comes home, or if he doesn't live at home, then when he sees you, maybe you could talk these questions over with him. Do you think that would help? No. No? Well, yes, but he shouldn't have questions. Everyone has questions. You have questions. You just called your pastor with questions. Well, that's different. Well, how come you're allowed to have questions, but he shouldn't have questions? There was a long pause. He can have questions. Well, now really think about this before you answer, please. We're 2 dads in a room. I have 2 kids, and like you, I love them very much and sincerely want the best for them. Do you really think your son's better off having no questions? Is that really the type of life you want for your son, truly? There was a long pause, and he said, no. Agreed. I don't want that for my kids either. In your son's critical thinking class, that's what we do. I ask students to question everything. Everything. I ask questions. Just like I ask you questions today. I never tell you what to think, I ask you questions. And we finished with a handshake and an understanding. That's from Peter Boghossian from his book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. He is an instructor of philosophy at Portland State University, and he joins me on the air tonight. Glad you're here.
Oh, it's a delight to be here. Thanks.
So, A Manual for Creating Atheists. My first thought automatically right off the bat is the argument that we're not out to create atheists, right? We're not worshiping at the church of atheism. We're on a search, a quest for truth. And so it's actually a misstatement to say that our desire is to create atheists. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. How would you respond to that?
It's interesting. Anyone who thinks that New Atheism is about God doesn't understand New Atheism. New Atheism is about epistemology. New Atheism is about the way people formulate beliefs, and are those ways to come to truth reliable? The book, in A Manual for Creating Atheists, I teach people step by step how to speak to the faithful and disabuse them of faith, while at the same time instilling values of reason and rationality to help them think clearly and critically.
I think you and I share the position that if you're looking for the facts, if you're following the chain of evidence, atheism is going to be the end zone that you end up in, right? I mean, because we look around in a natural world operating by natural laws, we don't see supernatural forces at play. Non-theism just seems to be a natural result of an objective look at the world we live in. Is that the angle you're taking?
That's a part of the angle, but looking at the facts is not sufficient, because if you don't value evidence, or if you weigh evidence differently, maybe, for example, you weigh your feelings differently, or you weigh the community that you're in differently, or you weigh tradition differently. We can cut through all of that. We can cut through religion, we can cut through God, and we can focus on the root of the problem, which is faith. Faith is the problem. Faith is an unreliable way to think about problems that will not lead one to the truth. And so if we help to disabuse people of faith as a reasoning process, as a way to know the world, as a way to think, then we can reinstill values like the scientific method, understanding science, belief revision, being trustful of reason. So it's not enough that one just look at the evidence. One has to have some tools by which one both weighs that evidence in an evaluative capacity and then uses that evidence, actually uses it to make better decisions.
So I'll play the theist card. I come to you and I say, look, my faith makes me happy. You know, you don't know my faith. You don't know what relationship I may or may not have with God. Who are you to judge me? Why don't you just let me live my life and leave me alone?
That's great. I'm totally happy to have that discussion with you, that your faith makes you happy. And I think that's a wonderful and productive discussion to have after we have the discussion about whether or not faith is a reliable path to truth. You know, we were having a wonderful conversation here about faith and truth, and then you switched to your subjective feelings, to your feelings about the way that faith makes you feel. I'd like to bring that conversation back to faith as a means to the truth.
So there's a methodology at play. This is like a how-to manual for, I don't want to say debate, but how about conversation?
No. It is absolutely, positively not a debate. And even thinking about it as a debate makes somebody's epistemic, someone's thought process worse, makes them better at arguing. It is positively not a debate. This is a template. This is a guide. This is a list of techniques and strategies that you can use literally to talk somebody out of an unreliable way of thinking and to talk them into valuing reason and rationality. It's not a Jedi mind trick. It just draws from a vast body of literature, interdisciplinary and intradisciplinary and cross-disciplinary literature, specifically that, you know, it literally incorporates techniques from psychology, from motivational interviewing, from the work I've done with prison inmates. It focuses on how to change behavior of people who do not want their behavior changed. Everything from words to use in a conversation to templates to strategies, it's all there.
You mentioned prison inmates. I now have to go back and ask you the question. You've done extensive work doing what?
Well, I don't have a role there anymore. I was chairman of the Prison Advisory Committee, and I started community partnerships between Portland State University and Columbia River Correctional Institution, among other things. But my role and my study and some of my published work has been, how do we talk, just by talking to prison inmates, using the Socratic method, how do we help them desist from crime? So the people in my study, the people I work with, the inmates I work with, they receive very brief dialectical interventions, basically us talking together in a room. And the goal of the study was it was a feasibility study to see if we can conduct larger pilot studies, but to help these men desist from crime. And then we have qualitative and quantitative metrics. So the same process that we use to help prison inmates to think clearly and to reason morally and to reason effectively, we can use with those who've been infected by the faith virus.
Infected by the faith virus. You think it's
That's
a disease?
Correct. No, I don't think it's a disease. I think it's a contagion. And I'm certainly not the first one who's come up with that. My book details that. It's Brody at Darrell Ray uses that, and he's a head of an extensive organization that deals with therapy for people who are recovering from faith. In my conversation with Richard Dawkins, he discussed the faith virus. So that is not a term that I have used, but its transmission, you can look at it as the vectors and the way that it's transmitted in a very similar way to how people are infected with other pathogens or contagions or viral epidemics.
Talking here with Dr. Peter Boghossian. So it could be argued that they're not listening. They're not there to have a back and forth send-receive dialogue. They're preaching, they're proselytizing, you're the prodigal that is to be brought home. They're on a mission. They're completely closed off to anything you're going to say. Why bother? It's a waste of time.
That's false. That's an empirical question that's false. We know for a fact that people have been reasoned out of unreasonable beliefs. In fact, I'm just talking to John Loftus the other day. Hector Alvarez, Jerry DeWitt, his stage name is Sam Singleton. He's in my book. I call him Brother Sam as an inside joke. We know, Dan Barker, we know that's not true, and I would suggest not only do you have to be more hopeful, but the techniques in the book teach you step by step how to talk somebody out of faith and into reason. So that's just an untrue statement.
I'm living proof of that. If someone had given up on me, I wouldn't be here. That kind of thing. If we hadn't had a discussion, if the information hadn't been presented, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, so people can sit around and piss and moan and be upset and shake their fist all they want, but that is not a productive way to solve the problem. We have very, very serious problems that manifest themselves in a number of arenas, political arenas, local community engagements. We need to do something about this. And that's part of Chapter 9. I have containment protocols of how to contain the faith virus. 12 strategies. But the core of the book focuses on developing people. And you don't have to go out and actively help people. You can wait till they come to you. You can wait till someone has been infected by the faith virus. I was just telling someone the other day, I take my lunch over to sometimes to preachers in the park blocks, and I deliver my interventions to them there. So you can use these techniques in virtually any context you want. Maybe you have a loved one who's been infected by the faith virus.
Are some people more susceptible based on education, based on upbringing, based on culture?
Yeah, I think it's a multivariate problem, and I'll use a big word. I think it's covariant with a lot of things. I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist. I don't understand the mechanisms of the neurological mechanisms of the brain, how it works, but I think some people are more susceptible, and I think that they tend to assign higher degrees of confidence to certain propositions. I mean, it's an extraordinarily complicated problem because it deals with culture, it deals with family ties, it deals with this particular strain of the virus they've caught. And that's the other thing. So that's why it's not a debate. And that's why you had mentioned people being closed and closed-minded. So the book, one of the bodies of literature the book draws from is this thing called the trans-theoretical model of change. The trans-theoretical model has basically 5 models of change behavior. And so I teach people how to ask diagnostic questions to see how closed-minded somebody is, and then you can then pull from the tools and strategies to design an intervention targeted to that person at that stage of belief closure. And the idea is not to, of course it would be wonderful if you could just snap your fingers and somebody could live a life free of delusion, but often they go through those stages of change. So you need to meet someone where they are in their stage of change.
In my circle, I've seen something happen, and I'd like to just find out if there's any merit to it. Somebody's a fundamentalist, right? They hold to, let's call it the Christian faith. They believe every word of Scripture is divinely inspired and absolute fact. They believe in Yahweh, Jesus, all of it. And then they are confronted with the challenges of Scripture, the morality of Yahweh, whatever. There are reasons that they begin to say, well, you know, some of it's true, some of it's not. And so they step back. And then after a while, well, it's just a book of stories. And after a while, they step back and say, well, you know, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. And then before you know it, they end up in kind of this weird deist membrane where they kind of hang out, right? Well, you know, I know there's something out there. So they haven't walked away from God completely, but they've walked away from the most inconvenient parts of the religion they once held dear. Is that a common thing?
Two things. It's funny, the phrase walked away from God. I would say walked out of delusion. Yeah, what you described was almost perfectly in tandem, the stages of the trans-theoretical model. You start off in the pre-contemplative stage, you go to the contemplative stage, you go to the action stage. So there are these stages that you move through. So I think that's extraordinarily common. It's as a general rule, people come out of faith more slowly than they go into faith, in general.
And somebody says, I don't want to change. I don't have the interest in changing. Why would I change? If someone approaches you, Peter, and they say, look, I'm not interested. I'm happy with my life. Do you continue to sort of ping them with this type of stuff? Do you continue to try to force the dialogue or try some other tactic? Or do you just walk away?
I never walk away. But again, the purpose of the book isn't to tell people how to use the book. If some people, again, if they just want to use it, if they want to wait till somebody comes to them, if they want to be more active about it, there's no one right way. But you asked me what I do, and I recommend in the book that you always bring the conversation back to faith. As long as you're always on the topic of faith, you can help somebody. You can help them, again, using the trans-theoretical model, either move them down these stages of change, or you can help them because you have a possibility in those engagements, those little communications, those little micro interactions to offer people hope. That's what you're really doing. You're offering them freedom from the delusion that they have.
How much does the fear mechanism come into play? Let's say they step back, and they're back in that kind of deist phase, that nebulous prime mover phase, there's something out there phase. But in the back of their mind, they're afraid, probably due to family culture, church, whatever, of damnation, hellfire, whatever. The fear factor has got to be a pretty major thing, a major hurdle to get over, yes?
It's certainly a major hurdle for some people. Different people conceptualize and internalize these things differently. For some people, I can't say that you're either right or wrong. For some people, it's not fear of hell or fear of tortures of the damned. It's fear of being a bad person, or maybe it's fear of leading a meaningless life. Different people have different fears once they stop reasoning incorrectly and start to develop more reliable ways to think about problems.
From time to time, I grow frustrated with the atheist movement, and some in the atheist movement, because when they speak about the believer, they use words like religitard, creatard. You are mentally defective, is essentially what they're trying to say about anybody who is religious. And I want you, if you would, to speak to that. Have you encountered that? What are your thoughts?
I will say unequivocally, without hesitation or reservation, if your goal is to facilitate belief change, that is the exact opposite of what you ought to do. If your goal is to help somebody shed an unreliable way to think about problems and embrace a reliable way to think about problems, then in chapter 4 of my book, I talk about it, you have created an adversarial relationship. When you do that, people will put up a defensive posture. They'll dig deeper into their own beliefs. They'll, reseat themselves in their beliefs. And then the possibility of then dislodging the faith virus or delivering any kind of a micro-inoculation is forever lost. It's not the strategy you want to take if your goal, which is my goal, is to help disabuse people of delusion.
This movement occasionally does struggle with sort of a superiority complex, right? I mean, many of us crawled out of religion and we now see the world much more clearly and we think science is on our side. So now we feel like we're standing on a higher plane. And from the factual point of view, perhaps we are. But there seems to be a knee-jerk from many to sort of throw stones down at everybody else or out at everybody else, assuming a superior posture.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunate. As if because somebody is an atheist, I don't even know, I don't even know what that would, that's nothing is entailed by being an atheist. No values are entailed by that. Just think about it like the fact that you don't collect stamps. Nothing is entailed by the fact that you're not a stamp collector. It's not entailed by the fact that you're an atheist that you can reason well.
You embrace the word. Some people walk away from atheist because it's a statement of what I don't hold to, right? Instead of humanist, rationalist, skeptic, secularist, whatever. But you use atheist and you use it pretty boldly. Yeah, I don't identify with it, and I read about that in my book. I don't consider myself, it's not part of my identity, as odd as that may seem, given the book and speaking engagements and classes that I teach in it. But yeah, I'm sure you're very familiar with the famous line, I think there's something about it in your book, The Deconverted, that we're all atheists in regard to something. The atheist just goes one further and says, I'm an atheist in regard to it all. I think that was Dawkins, but I'll take credit for his words.
No,
Thanks, Richard.
I think it was actually Stephen F. Roberts who said it first, and it was incorrectly put on one of Dawkins' books and then incorrectly ascribed to Dawkins. But you use kind of that, if memory serves me correctly, you talk about some of those ideas in your book. And I think that the idea that if one is an atheist, that's a badge of pride is just silliness. It's just ridiculous. It doesn't take any intellectual wherewithal to not believe in Thor.
Making myself a note here. Send check to Dr. Boghossian for slugging my book. Thank you. You're very kind.
Well, I put it in my book because I think it's a good book. I wouldn't have done that. And if you watch my TAM talk on authenticity, I wouldn't have done that unless I sincerely thought it was a good book and that people ought to read it.
Look, I get it. I'm the bargain rack. Yeah, I totally get where I am in the pecking order. So I find myself apologizing from time to time. I'm just a guy who used to do Christian radio, who managed to sort of at midlife find his own voice and bust out of religion and told people about it to encourage them. And that's all I got.
I don't buy into this notion that there's some kind of a pecking order. I mean, everybody is making a contribution. They're doing what they're doing, and they're trying to help. This is, again, we talked about this. This is a pretty serious problem. And so in your book, you tell a story, and you tell your story, and I think that I know that's resonated with people because I've read what people had to say about it online. And so you're making a contribution to help people. And I think that the way of thinking about it as a pecking order, I don't know, maybe with the four horsemen on top, quote unquote top, but I think we're all making a contribution in a different sense. My dad said to me, make sure before you go out, you leave the world a better place. Yeah. And so we're all doing what we can to do that.
It's almost a daily occurrence, if not a daily occurrence. On Facebook, YouTube, email, somebody approaches me. They're obviously sending, they are not receiving. They are telling me that I'm arrogant. How arrogant are you who are you to question God? And your approach to them might be what?
Well, it depends on the context, but I would say, what do you mean by that? And so I wouldn't say this, but it seems to me to be astonishingly arrogant that they know not only that there's a God, but that God knows what it wants you to do. God discharges his whims in some kind of way. But again, that's when I'd bring the conversation back to faith. So I'd say, well, what do you mean by that? How do you know that? And that is an unbelievably potent and devastating, disarming, dismantling question.
And then they say, the evidence is overwhelming for God. Just look around you. The evidence is everywhere. Now, granted, you may not get a lot of detail when they say the evidence is everywhere, but I hear it quite a bit.
All right, that's great. That's really interesting. So let's talk about that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean, like trees and flowers and stuff? What do you mean? Do you mean the planets or the Quran, the Bible, the works of L. Ron Hubbard? What do you mean the evidence is overwhelming?
Well, hell, I don't know. Everything is just so darn complex out there.
Okay, cool. So that's an argument from complexity. So now you know where they stand. Okay, so this is one way, and again, we're doing this absent of any context, but let's say that complexity could be explained to you. I'm not saying I can explain it to you, but let's say that someone could explain it to you using the tools of science. Would you still believe in God? Now, they have two choices, right? it's not actually binary, but they could say, I don't know. But, they could say yes or no. So if they say, yes, I would still believe in God, okay then. So you don't believe in God because of look around you. You don't believe in God because of complexity, right? So you believe in God from something other than complexity. So we can then wipe the complexity argument off the table. Now, they could say, I don't know, which is a whole other conversation entirely. It's more complicated if people say, I don't know. Now, if they say to you, no, it cannot be explained by the tools of science, okay, great. That's a type of the feasibility argument. So you can then talk about that in that context, what that actually means, what complexity means, how they know that, and then you can engage them. And again, you don't need any knowledge or background, any scientific knowledge or background. You just need to know how to ask the right questions, because you're not deconverting anybody. You're enabling them to deconvert themselves. So you're asking them questions to see if their own beliefs hold up to internal scrutiny, to their scrutiny. That's how you do it.
Do you find that often when those types of seeds are planted, months, even years will go by before you see them come to fruition?
Unquestionably, it takes time. It's a really good indicator that it's successful if they become angry, though. If they become angry or upset or offended, then they have the concept. It's an indicator. It's a marker that they're not being sincere and honest with themselves. It's a marker that the treatment, that the intervention you've delivered has been effective or is being effective. Now, there is literature that says that there's a certain percentage of people who would then hunker down in their beliefs and become more extreme. But often that's just part of the process of becoming liberated of delusion and entering a life of reason. Sometimes you have to dig deeper before you get better.
So if I'm speaking to someone and I'm going after their faith, or I'm challenging in some way their cherished belief system, and they get offended, you're asserting that it might be because in some way I have been effective, and it's not just the fact that I just sort of insulted the most important thing in their life, because that's my first instinct. I just took their precious beloved deity and I just kicked them in the teeth, and they're pissed off about it. That's progress?
Yeah. You're not kicking their deity in the teeth. You're questioning the way they know about their deity.
Well, no, and let me qualify that. I'm not saying I just went in as the angry guy. I'm not insulting them. I'm not even in attack mode. I'm mostly asking questions. Let's say I'm using much of your methodology, but they're going to take it personally, and they're going to play in some way the victim card in many respects.
Yeah, just quickly, the reason that they almost have to do that is because they don't proportion their belief to the evidence. If they proportion their belief to the evidence, then they wouldn't need to be offended. They just present evidence. So that's a defensive technique that people use when they don't have enough evidence for what they believe. If you have enough evidence for what you believe, you don't need to be offended. You just need to show the evidence. Sometimes even saying that to people can help jar them a little bit. And again, you just keep your cool the whole time.
Ultimately, someone doesn't need to be a debater. They don't need to be out on the front lines of activism. They don't need to be in a forward position as far as the argument against religion, the fight against religion necessarily, for the book to benefit them, right? This is going to help them have the discussion with the religious people in their own private circles, at the office, over the water cooler, that kind of thing, correct?
They need two things. The person who's asking the questions needs to be sincere, and they need to be honest. And the next level, and I talk about how to develop this in the book, is you need to, and I also talk about this in my TAM talk, you need to be forthright in your speech. Never pretend to know something you don't know, and don't be held hostage to the fact that you have to feel bad when someone asks you a question if you don't know the answer. Not pretending to know something you don't know is a virtue.
We're going to be speaking with a lot of people over the course of this show and their own perspectives about what are the most effective ways to help, as you say, to fight the religion virus, the God virus, the superstition virus.
Faith virus.
That seems
the faith virus, yeah. Because it's a virus that affects reasoning centers. It affects the way that people reason.
Dr. Peter Boghossian's book is called A Manual for Creating Atheists. It is available now on Amazon. Is that correct?
That is correct.
This is a book I take personally. This is the one, as of late, that really resonates with me, and I think we need all the tools in the arsenal we can get to further the discussion out there.
I think my content seems to resonate with people. It's that approach of being blunt, but yet not, what word did you use, like creatard or whatever?
Okay. I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
It makes me crazy. You know what? And I get frustrated with the religious as well. I just think, how counterproductive is it to go in and tell them how stupid they are when you're trying to create conversation about this topic? It just makes no sense.
Yeah, that's Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a cheesy book, but you begin with the end in mind. Yeah. What's the end? The end is to help people reason more reliably. What's the problem? The problem is they have faith. The problem is that faith prevents them from reasoning more reliably. Okay, begin with the end. That's the end in mind. Now let's work backwards. How do we get to that point? Well, we get to that point by insert chapter 4, insert chapter 5 of my book.
And any tools that we can have that help to continue that in our own lives and spur it in the minds of other people is something I think we should embrace. And so I really am totally behind the book. It's called A Manual for Creating Atheists. Dr. Peter Boghossian, I think it's awesome. It's a great idea, and I wish you the very best with it, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I want to echo that. It's not only about helping us to lead examined lives. It's about helping people in our community to lead examined lives. And so the book provides people with the tools so that they can engage the faithful in productive discussions to help disabuse them of faith and to help them embrace reason and rationality. And so I very much appreciate your support. I'm just one person. I simply cannot do this alone. But if we get the book, and it's also not enough just that people read the book. They have to apply the techniques. They have to use what they've learned in the book. If we can get the book, we had to do a second print run, and it was it broke the top 100 on Amazon, and it was doing exceptionally well, number 1 in 3 categories. If we can get the book not only in enough hands, but if we can get enough people using the book, just think about that. That right there, there are hundreds of thousands of micro-inoculations to the populace on a daily basis. We can literally dislodge the faith virus from its host.
Dr. Peter Boghossian, thanks so much for a great conversation and for being a great guest on the show. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Seth. I appreciate it.
We're going to finish out the show with an excerpt from the book. And again, there's a couple of things I want to say just quickly. First of all, I don't want this to sound like an infomercial, right? I can't tell you how many book requests I get a week. And I understand everybody's got something to say and they're desperate to get the message out. Obviously, there's just no way. All of my posts would be book posts. I have no time to read everything that's thrown my direction. But from time to time, I do get the opportunity to sort of get behind some books that I really think are going to make a difference out there. And this just seems to be one that resonates with me. Another thing I really like about it is that Dr. Boghossian has priced it to the point where it's as accessible as it really can be at that price. But he ain't making much on the book. I know this. His end zone is not to get rich with A Manual for Creating Atheists. There's the dog. You hear it? His end zone is to try to get the message out and to try to extend the conversation out there, to try to get people talking, to get these methods in play. And we've had a lot of opinions from our listeners on whether or not we ought to be creating atheists. Heidi on Facebook said, you know how to make an atheist? Have them actually read the Bible word for word. Look at the real world and all that happens, then let them read a few science books. As long as they weren't completely indoctrinated as children, that should do it. I don't know, that's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it. I mean, I know a lot of people who read the Bible and look at the real world and they hold to their faith just as much as they did before. There's something else I think at play. Brian said, my problem here is I continually get banned from the Christian educating, quote unquote, educating Facebook pages due to my aggressive questioning and open directness. Well, I haven't seen examples of what you're talking about, Brian. If you're jumping into a Christian Facebook page and you're just throwing stuff out, what do you expect? You expect the red carpet? Welcome, Brian. Thanks for showing up and challenging our cherished belief. I'm not saying they shouldn't have their cage rattled from time to time, but, is that the most productive place? Is there a debate forum online? Is there somewhere else where you're not essentially stepping into somebody else's house and telling them that they've decorated the place completely poorly? I mean, you're just not going to get the response you want. And, the internet is a big place. There may be more appropriate venues to have those particular conversations. And again, I'm not saying we give the religious a pass. I'm not saying that the nonsense in Scripture and the crazy stories of the Bible and mythology shouldn't be sometimes ridiculed. I mean, you've seen my videos on Noah's Ark and how to beat your slave and, Elisha and the bears and all. I mean, I've had more than my share of fun ridiculing the ridiculous from my former faith. But, am I logging on to religious websites and throwing my stuff out there on their wall? No, I just don't think that's not going to accomplish the end that I'm seeking. Glenn said, how do we approach theists, the good Christian folk who genuinely think their faith does more good than harm, in a non-threatening way, and get them to look at belief objectively without the emotion that short-circuits thought? I really like J.R. Hammond's Atheist TV network idea. Maybe it needs to be a broader secular or humanist network so it defines what we are for, not just what we are against. I've got Jevon on Skype. Is it Jevon? Jevon, how did I say it? Jevon. I'm so glad you called the show. What do you have for us tonight?
Okay, I've been wondering about, do you think there's such a thing as too far gone?
Do I think some people are too far gone? Even if they were, I'm not sure I want to be the guy who's going to start writing people off completely, though. If someone had looked at me when I was eyeball deep in the faith, we're praying on the radio, we're taking prayer requests and praying on the air. I am hugely in love with the contemporary Christian radio format in the early 90s, and I am singing Jesus songs, and we're going to church, and we're absolutely dyed-in-the-wool, true blue believing, right? If someone had looked at me and said, what a waste of time. He's too far gone. Look at him. He's happy, clappy, religious. This show would not exist. And I'm not sure I want to be the guy who just opts out and says, forget it. And I'll tell you, even if the person didn't want their mind changed or weren't in a position where they would ever have a dialogue with you, it doesn't mean that the conversation shouldn't be had. Let's talk about Noah's Ark. I've got some questions about Noah's Ark. When the fresh water rained down and mixed with the seawater in the ocean, the salt water became brackish. Wouldn't that have killed all the sea creatures and the freshwater creatures as well? Hey, if the water covered Mount Everest, wouldn't all that water have frozen up there? Hey, what did the carnivores eat? Who shoveled the thousands of tons of animal waste out of a stadium-sized boat with a single window? Now, even if I didn't think the person was even listening, I still think the question needs to be asked, don't you? How did them people live to be 500 years old? It's weird. Noah's Ark, by the way, I always go back to it because it is my favorite story when I'm talking to someone who is in love with the Bible, and especially the Noah story in its happiest form. God saved this righteous man. And there's doves, and there's rainbows, and there's these beautiful animals walking up the ramp into the ark. And, this is stuff they tell the children, and you get a chance to actually hold that story up to the looking glass of scrutiny in front of someone, and you just watch their left eye start to twitch. I get a little satisfaction out of it. Hey, when all the animals got off the ark, all the animal and plant life that had remained was dead. What did they eat? How did 8 people 500 years old and older commit incest to repopulate the earth and create over 5,000 ethnic groups in 4,000 years? Yeah, the question needs to be asked. I saw a great... Where was I? It was at the conference this weekend. We were talking about the best ways to be effective, and how often when using the word you put somebody on the defensive. Well, you need to be doing this. Well, you're doing that wrong. Well, you're just ignorant. You're totally wrong, right? This is a word that causes doors to close. causes walls to go up. I'm not saying it shouldn't ever be used, but let's talk about what's the most effective when we're having the conversation. The word so often that is more effective is the word I. I just can't get my head around the fact that God and Noah were on speaking terms when he was building the ark, but after the flood, Noah had to use a dove to go find land when God could have just pointed him in the right direction. And if the ark didn't have a rudder or a motor on it, what difference did it make anyway? They were adrift. Right? I've used the word I, and I've drawn a huge circle around what is a legitimate question based in the quote-unquote facts of Scripture. Now, I didn't tell someone else, you're stupid for believing the Noah's Ark story. I said, I've read the story, and I can't figure this out. I can't figure this out. I just released a video with Rebecca Vitzman, who was the survivor, one of the many survivors, actually, of the May 20th, 2013 Moore, Oklahoma tornado an EFI twister went through, and she gained essentially international fame when she was interviewed by Wolf Blitzer on CNN's Situation Report. And I finally had the chance to sit down on camera with her. I just begged her, look, I would love to tell your story, because everyone saw that clip on CNN, but no one really knew what happened. What's the story? And I was curious. I'm a storyteller, and I thought this story deserved more than, just a sort of a passing shot somewhere on a stage or on a webcam or whatever. I thought, let's sit her down and let's actually talk. And she was amazing on camera. And she so expressively and so transparently told about the day that, she was home with her son, who was 18 months old. There's a freaking EF5 twister coming right at the house. And she hopped in the car and drove south in fear for her life, and came back to find the entire place decimated. And she wasn't an out atheist at the time. And it was at that sort of moment on live television that she, for the first time, said it out loud to the people who she was related to, the people in her inner and outer circle. And anyway, she may actually join us for next week's show for a few minutes. We're doing a podcast next Tuesday night about atheists who are not yet out. I felt like it was time to sort of explore that again, because I've been meeting so many people in my travels. I've been speaking around the country, and I met a couple in, it was in Philadelphia. Precious couple, right? They were at the conference, the first free thought conference they'd ever been to. They told their family they were going to a marriage seminar. They couldn't tell their family, or at least weren't in a position where they wanted to tell their family, we're going to an atheist or free thought or humanist event, because the repercussions were just too great for them at that time. And I totally get it. There's some people who are going to flip out and call them cowards. What's the matter with you? Are you ashamed? Why won't you just say it? Throw caution to the wind. These people who are saying these charges do not live, in my opinion, in the real world, or at least don't understand what it's like to live in cultures where the consequences, both personally and professionally, can be so incredibly great. We're playing the long game here. And these two were not at the point in their lives where they could say something, or they weren't ready to deal with the fallout. They just weren't there, but they were desperate to be around fellow atheists, skeptics, rationalists, humanists, whatever. And they had a ball. I saw them, just went up and gave them a big hug, both of them. Just so glad you're here. We're going to be doing a show called Atheists Who Are Not Yet Out next Tuesday. Anyway, back to Rebecca's story. The Moore, Oklahoma twister is something I've been talking about in my presentations around the country, because it's another ripe opportunity to start asking legitimate questions. Why would a God uninterested in the pleas and the cries at 6 p.m. be suddenly receiving petitions at 7 p.m.? It doesn't make any sense. Why would the God who allowed an entire town to be leveled and 25 people to die and so many hundreds to be injured be then so ready to bring healing into the situation? Now, some people say this is the why do bad things happen to good people argument, and the problem of evil. It's a fallen world. They'll go off on a tangent. But I think these are great opportunities for us to ask the question, I don't understand how this is. This to me doesn't really wash. I don't agree that a benevolent and loving God would sit back and do nothing, as these young children are in the basement of Plaza Towers Elementary School screaming for their lives and are then killed. And then God is the hero 5 minutes later, as people put "God bless more" on marquees and signs all across the region. Governor Mary Fallin goes on national television to ask for prayers from the very God who allowed the disaster to begin with. I think that's a little odd. What do you think? I say in my book that, doubt it's like a wrapping in the back of your skull. And you learn to ignore it. But there comes a point when you start to just listen. Fine. What do you want? Just get it. Just tell me what it is. What's this thing that's bugging you? Just stop already, right? And sometimes it takes months or years before you get to that point. Area code 949, thank you for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Yeah, hi, this is Steve.
Steve, thanks for calling. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, hey, I am so pleased to be on the show with you. I've been listening for the last year or two, and I have to tell you, I really appreciate what you are doing. I am in a situation out here where my family is and I, frankly, we're all members of a very fundamentalist church. My children go to the school that's housed by the fundamentalist church. I used to be in a position of leadership with the school and had to resign in protest over positions that they were taking in opposition to teaching real science. And it's a struggle, frankly, out here. And I wanted to let you know that I appreciate your stance and your education. You're a voice of encouragement. Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure. I appreciate the call very much. Did you have an opinion on the best ways to go out and fight against irrational thinking and superstitious nonsense? Or, do you have a tactic, an opinion, a perspective? What?
That's a real tough one because I've been essentially an atheist for the last 30 years since I went to college. But my wife wanted to explore faith, and we found a quote-unquote home church. I allowed my children to attend the school and thought really not a lot of it. And it was only until the last 6 or 7 years that I realized, wow, they're teaching that dinosaurs walked on Earth with humans. They're teaching, in fact, they taught my son in second grade that human beings were not mammals. And by the time we got into the family of the church, that's when the relationships sunk in. That's when our roots joined with the roots of the other families. Good people. My children have great friends, and we've got good friends there too. But unfortunately, they're also teaching the children, my children, and 300 or 400 others, that evolution is a lie from the pit of hell. And so my challenge has been how best to teach my children the truth while not creating such a strong sense of cognitive dissonance for them that it really disrupts their lives. And about 2 months ago, I finally just had to sit the family down and let them know that Dad didn't believe what the pastors and the teachers and the principal and Mom, frankly, all believe. And it was a challenge for the kids and one that we're still struggling with.
Let me recommend a show to you if you haven't already heard it. You may have. It aired in July of this year with Dale McGowan. We called it Secular Parenting. And it's not how to create an atheist, but how to raise a free thinker, how to train your children so that they can properly explore the world and then come to a conclusion on their own, so that the goal isn't to pound atheism into their heads or to piss off a spouse who's a believer, but it's how do we give our kids the tools so that they can properly explore our world and then come to a point of understanding and embracing a worldview that belongs to them, a foundation they've built themselves. It's a great show. If you get a chance, it's called Secular Parenting with Dale McGowan. You can find it on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, or on the thinkingatheist.com podcast tab, okay?
I've heard it. It is a great show. Thanks for the reference. And I've also got Dale's books.
Awesome.
Big help.
He's a lot smarter than me, so read that sucker, man. And thanks for the kind words, and thanks for the call. Take it easy, man.
My pleasure.
All right, we'll see you later. I had a great message from Jacob. He said this: just like children should not be indoctrinated into religion, they shouldn't be indoctrinated into atheism. They need to be shown how to think, not what to think. I think the same is true for religious adults we're trying to engage with. The goal should not be to convert them to atheism. I feel we should offer them a way out of superstition by means of critical thinking. The default position, once you no longer believe in a God, is atheism. But that should not necessarily be the goal. That's the beginning. Being an atheist should not define a person. It's simply the start of a secular life. From there, one should learn as much information as possible about what we can objectively know to be true and rebuild one's life based on that foundation. Be a good human being. Be active in the things you're passionate about. Be awed by the wonder of the universe. Be excited to know how all of this really got here instead of making up stories that fleetingly make one feel more comfortable. We shouldn't strive to create atheists, quote unquote. We should strive to show that you don't need to believe in fairy tales to be a good person and to live a fulfilling life. Jacob, thanks for the message. And I think that's relates to the first question I had for Dr. Boghossian at the beginning of the conversation. I know what he's doing. I understand where he's going with it. And it's a great hook for a book, by the way. But when I speak to someone, my goal, at least on the front end, is not to make them an atheist. I'm not out to create an atheist. What I want is truth. And that's the case in my own life. I didn't set out to prove atheism. I didn't walk out the door one day and said, today I'm going to go out and prove the atheist position. I went out and started examining the world honestly, living an evidence-based life, looking at legitimate science, legitimate cosmology, legitimate history, and putting the puzzle pieces together. My atheism, my non-belief in any deity, came as a result of an evidence-based life. And so I totally take Jacob's point, and I agree. I think you don't go out and you say outright, look, I'm going to make you an atheist. What I say is, let's find out what the truth is, whatever it is, wherever it is. If there's a question out there, let's ask it. If they tell us it's forbidden to ask, we should really ask that question. Let's put that one at the top of the list, man. And if that question raises more questions, let's explore those. And you know what? Let's keep asking. Once we get the answer, let's test the answer from time to time just to see. Just keep literally rapping on the wall to make sure it's still sound. And if we break through and to some other place, let's do that. Let's go there. Let's go find where that path leads. And for many of us, our non-belief, our non-theism, our atheism came as a result of looking around at the evidence and saying, yeah, the universe seems to operate exactly as it would without a deity. And if there was a God, he's not at all interested in using his godlike powers, or his omnipotence, rather, to prove himself. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a need for any debate. We wouldn't have to have any discussions about it. Why every time I see Dan Barker debating somebody like Dinesh D'Souza, I think to myself, this debate shouldn't be necessary if God exists. And if billions of people are worshiping the wrong God or no God at all, it seems to me the deity in question would be really, really interested in clearing things up. And if it's not a God interested in proving himself, herself, itself, just going to lie out in the corner of, way out in the outer membrane of the universe and do nothing, and we're all like fish in a fish tank, well, why am I interested at all in focusing on, especially worshiping said deity? This deity's not really interested in me or my loved ones or my life or my safety or my future, my goals, my loves, my hopes, my dreams. This deity's out there just essentially a non-issue, a non-player. Like the person at the family reunion that's supposed to be related and never shows up, it just doesn't matter. You have no idea who they are, you don't know what they look like, you don't have a relationship with them, why do you care? So if he's going to be involved in my life, you better freaking get to it. And if he's not interested, then neither am I. And I'm going to look around at the world, and I'm going to say, honestly, well, it runs perfectly well without the invocation of God, thank you very much. My life is actually better without the invocation of God. I find the answers more satisfying when you leave God completely out of it. Area code 914, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hello, this is Bradley.
Thanks for calling, Bradley. We're talking tonight about a manual for creating atheists. Is there one? Should there be one? And what should it say? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is actually an extremely interesting topic. I'm a not really newly converted atheist, but I'm actually a teenager, and I find it extremely interesting the ways that my friends interact with things like this. And I think that the main way that people are able to do this is, or that we are going to be able to do this, is to give people time without church or without a synagogue or, without any place of study, and get them to take a break from a place like that and realize that even if they are not around a place like this, that God is not going to punish them for not going. I also think that mainly the reason that people try to disprove things like this, that, you can't, switch my religion or whatever, is absolutely ridiculous. I think that's impossible.
So you think,
yeah,
because they're being dispounded all the time with the message of God from the pulpit, they're surrounded by God on everybody's lips, they're going to Sunday school, they're praying, they're passing the plate, they're around a culture of the church. You think if you can get someone to disengage and not be afraid of judgment for not being in the pew, but to disengage and go out and spend time in the real world, you think they'll be a lot less predisposed to buy into the BS?
Time away from that. Yes, that time away from that would sort of force them to understand that the higher power is not the reason that they're living or the reason that they haven't been punished.
Well, maybe, it doesn't speak to the people who are maybe studying the Bible in their homes or live in an insular community, or maybe it's a generational thing, or maybe there are other factors in play. I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's a lot easier not to go to church when you haven't been going to church. At first you have guilt, right? At first you're like, oh, I really need to be in church. After a few Sundays of sleeping in and getting your coffee and relaxing and enjoying your own weekend of getting your time back, it becomes a whole lot easier to just think, hey, Christmas and Easter sounds like plenty to me. And then before you know it, you just don't go at all. And when you're not being surrounded by all of that, it's a lot easier for perhaps some science to maybe filter in through the cracks, huh?
Correct. It gives you a lot more free time that way.
Awesome. Thanks for the call. Thanks for listening. Much appreciated.
Yep.
All right, take it easy. Had a message in from Will. He said, I've only been an atheist since about April. I can firmly say I came to it on my own and that I was not, quote unquote, made. In fact, it took 27 years for me to reach the conclusion that there is and never was a God. It was a process of childish Christian to curious, mature Christian to fundy asshole to lukewarm Christian to deist and finally to atheist. This actually shocked my wife, who doesn't believe in God but doesn't call herself an atheist, when I told her, and I don't think my parents really take it all that seriously. To be fair, I am prone to extremes. I am an anarcho-libertarian politically, making me perceptively both hard left and hard right at the same time. I guess they all view atheist as an extreme. To get back on track, the idea of making atheists disgusts me. It turns us into missionaries. And I would rather us be selfish activists that let the chips fall where they may. Must be the libertarian in you. This is one of the things that attracted me to the community after all, and your show specifically, Seth. When I first identified as an atheist, I was incredibly angry, and your show was an important part of talking me down off that cliff. I like that the atheist community exists for its own sake and that we're here for each other. We're not a boot camp for new recruits pumping out propaganda and foot soldiers for some great cause to change the world. We're a net for those leaving batshit religious lifestyles that need a hand. We should stay that way. Well, I want to clarify a few things, Will. By the way, I'm glad you crawled out, man. I'm glad you found your voice, and I'm really glad you're part of the community. But you may, at least in a few ways, misunderstand what the Thinking Atheist is. I don't want TTA to just be us sitting around talking to ourselves. Yes, it is a landing zone and a safe haven, especially the social media pages for people who are looking for a haven of rationality and some people who don't think they're Satan or devil worshippers or these baby-eating monsters. And we've all seen the stereotypes. Those stereotypes exist for a reason. A lot of people can't speak to family and even close friends about their lack of belief, and they come to our online pages to try to get some community, to try to get some support. They make friends, they get advice, they get information, they exchange ideas. That's what the page does, and it's one of the joys of my life. But when we go out and have a conversation, I'd like to have religious people also involved as well. I know religious people often listen to this show. Many of them browse our pages. And I am interested in changing minds. It's not propaganda to me, because the evidence is on our side. Look, what we are doing in the free thought community would not be necessary if religion had not been on the offense for literally thousands and thousands of years. People often come to me and they say, you're just treating atheism like a religion. Atheist communities are like church. You have a message, you have gatherings, you're just a religion. You're no better than religion is quite often the way they say it. But the absolute truth is that it's sad that we live in a culture where you have to have meetings or online communities that celebrate rationality. The Thinking Atheist website isn't a person. The Thinking Atheist is not a person. It's an icon. It's an idea. Question everything. Start thinking. Because you and I, if we come from the faith, come from a culture where they say, you're thinking too hard. Turn off your brain, take it on faith, go with the heart. Just go with it. No, we need to always be thinking, to have mind engaged, to be asking the hard questions. And I want to challenge others to do the same. Don't be afraid to ask and expect a reasonable answer. And if you don't get it, keep asking. I want to be an influence to cause other people to look around them and say, you know what, all this stuff doesn't really satisfy me. But I never had the courage to admit it anymore. I want to plant the seeds of doubt, even if those seeds cause someone to look at their worldview and then discover that they still believe it firmly. At least they examined it instead of just inheriting it or accepting it from the pulpit or for some spiritual leader somewhere. Yeah, I want other people to be impacted by what we do. I want someone to stumble upon a video that tackles the sacred cows of Scripture and the morality or immorality of God, or the infection of religion into a political system that was never designed to endorse religion. I want them to be a part of the conversation, and I want to change minds. I want more rationalists on this planet in 2 weeks than we have today. I don't think we sit and become islands unto ourselves and say, well, that's me, I'm taken care of. I think we have to have a wider sphere of influence than ourselves, and I think it's fulfilling to be a part of this discussion. I think it's important. I think we owe it to the generations that come after us to take the hard stand today. So yeah, I think we ought to be out there. Not banging on doors with tracts and literature and, like they do to us and threaten hell. But I'm saying that this tide was here long before we started. And we are now at a point where we are going to stand up and hold a hand of objection to the, as previously, uncontested tide of religion. They've operated largely unchecked for how long? Yeah, we're going to stand up and we're going to vocally do some battle out there. We're going to ask these hard questions. We're going to meet people where they are and ask them serious, thoughtful questions, compassionate questions, legitimate questions about what is true and what isn't. And I think we need people out there in the field doing it. And yeah, we're a net for the people who are finding their way out. But we also need to be out there on the front lines. Did you guys see Amanda Knief on CNN the other night? She was having a discussion with a pastor over the Greece, New York city council meetings that started their meetings with prayer, a Christian prayer. Now, she could have rolled over and done nothing about it, or she can go on national television and literally challenge this pastor's assertion that this is constitutional. And that he says the objection to it is the government trying to control prayer, which is crap. It's not even remotely what the argument's about. Amanda went on television and she did battle for the truth, man. We need those people. We can sit back and bitch and moan about how crappy the world is, or we can go out and try to do something about it. It feeds me to do something about it. We find our gifts, we play to them. I would encourage you, you may not be an activist, you may not have that nature, maybe that's not your thing, but understand that sitting on our hands gets us nowhere. And just simply being a net for people to fall into when they fall out of religion is not enough. We have to be out there and being a part of the conversation, which is a huge reason that I wanted Dr. Boghossian on this show, and I wanted to highlight his book. Because I agree, I think if you are out there addressing the issue of faith, especially in a culture where people say he's a man of faith, she's a woman of faith, and it's a compliment. It's a person of faith. It doesn't occur to people to think this is a person who believes something without any evidence, which is the same thing. We would ridicule that person, but if you're a person of faith, you're held up on a pedestal. Faith is a problem. And his book tackles faith, and it gives people tools to do so. I think it has merit. I'm going to place a link to the book on Amazon in the description box of this video. And I know Dr. Boghossian ain't getting rich on this sucker. I would encourage you to support it because it's worth supporting. From the book, and again with his permission, I will finish the show with a reading from a chapter called Street Epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. The chapter says this: Street epistemology is a vision and a strategy for the next generation of atheists, skeptics, humanists, philosophers, and activists. Left behind is the idealized vision of wimpy, effete philosophers, older men in jackets with elbow patches, smoking pipes, stroking their white, unkempt beards. Gone is cowering to ideology, orthodoxy, and the modern threat of political correctness. Enter the street epistemologist, an articulate, clear, helpful voice with an unremitting desire to help people overcome their faith and to create a better world. A world that uses intelligence, reason, rationality, thoughtfulness, ingenuity, sincerity, science, and kindness to build the future. Not a world built on faith, delusion, pretending, religion, fear, pseudoscience, superstition, or a certainty achieved by keeping people in a stupor that makes them pawns of unseen forces because they are terrified. The street epistemologist is a philosopher and a fighter. She has a savvy and street smarts that come from the school of hard knocks. She relentlessly helps others by tearing down falsehoods about whatever enshrined truths, quote-unquote truths, enslave us. But the street epistemologist doesn't just tear down fairy tales, comforting delusions, and imagined entities. She offers a humanistic vision. Let's be blunt, direct, and honest with ourselves and with others. Let's help people develop a trustfulness of reason and a willingness to reconsider, and let's place rationality in the service of humanity. Street epistemology offers a humanism that's taken some hits and gained from experience. This isn't Pollyanna humanism, but a humanism that's been slapped around and won't fall apart. Reason and rationality have endurance. They don't evaporate the moment you get slugged, and you will get slugged. The immediate forerunners to street epistemologists were the Four Horsemen, each of whom contributed to identifying a part of the problem with faith and religion. American neuroscientist Sam Harris articulated the problems and consequences of faith. British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins explained the God delusion and taught us how ideas spread from person to person within a culture. American philosopher Daniel Dennett analyzed religion and its effect as natural phenomena. British-American author Christopher Hitchens divorced religion from morality and addressed the historical role of religion. The Four Horsemen called out the problem of faith and religion and started a turn in our thinking and in our culture. They demeaned society's view of religion, faith, and superstition, while elevating attitudes about reason, rationality, enlightenment, and humanistic values. The Four Horsemen identified the problems and raised our awareness, but they offered few solutions, no roadmap, not even guideposts. Now the onus is upon the next generation of thinkers and activists to take direct and immediate action to fix the problems Harris, Dawkins, Dennett, and Hitchens identified. A Manual for Creating Atheists is a step beyond Harris, Dawkins, Hitchens, and Dennett. A Manual for Creating Atheists offers practical solutions to the problems of faith and religion through the creation of street epistemologists, legions of people who view interactions with the faithful as clinical interventions designed to disabuse them of their faith. Hitchens may be gone, but no single individual will take his place. Instead of a replacement horseman, there are millions of horsemen, ushering in a new enlightenment and an age of reason. You, the reader, will be one of these horsemen. You will become a street epistemologist. You will transform a broken world, long ruled by unquestioned faith, into a society built on reason, evidence, and thought-out positions. This is work that needs to be done, and work that will pay off by potentially helping millions, even billions of people to live in a better world. Dr. Peter Boghossian, from his book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Another huge thank you to him for being a great guest on the show. I will again link the book in the description box of this show. Next Tuesday night, we talk to and about atheists who are not yet out. Why do they stay in the shadows? If you have an opinion on this, you can send me an email, podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. Thanks for listening. Have a great week. We'll see you later.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.